Hello everyone, this is Marc Sabatella from Mastering MuseScore, and welcome to the MuseScore Café. So this is my regular Wednesday series. We talk about using MuseScore, talk about the various different ways of using it to create music. And today's session, I'm going to be focusing on a particular topic having to do with creating accompaniment. And in particular, things involving experimenting with different chords and so forth, because this is going to be something we're going to be doing a lot in the context of the Harmony and Chord Progressions course, which of course you've heard me talk about a ton, so I'm not going to talk about it a ton here, but this is in support of that. I want to show you some techniques that will be useful if you're taking part in the course, but will also be useful for anyone interested in the subject of experimenting with accompaniment. So great to see people checking in here, and Rod, good to see you in the wee hours of your morning. Okay, so what I want to talk about here is sort of a kind of a specific use case that comes up reasonably often if you're trying to compose new music, or if you're arranging an existing song. And these are all the things that we talk about in the context of the Harmony and Chord Progressions course. So I want to show you what this might actually look like, what it might look like to try out different chords and try out different ways of playing those chords, because the idea is we don't want you to get the wrong idea. In other words, if you just plug some chord symbols in and listen to MuseScore's playback, the results might fool you. The results might cause you to think something doesn't actually work that will work when it's played, for real, as opposed to by MuseScore's playback. Occasionally, the other way around might happen. You might think something works because it sounds okay in MuseScore, but it won't work in real life. That's actually a little less likely to be a problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just create a new score here, and we're going to play around a little bit. So what I'm going to do, first of all, I got to think about what instruments I'm even going to create this score for. And I'll tell you what I'll do. I want my melody instrument to be something, what do I want it to be? I don't even know what I want it to be. I'll have it be violin. No, wind instruments work well. So I'm going to use oboe. I'll use oboe for my melody instrument. And then I'm going to add a piano as well. Okay? And let's see. I do have my chat pinned, but actually what I need to do is not so much pin my chat as make this window smaller. So I will do that in a moment. So I'm adding a piano. Eventually you'll see I may add other instruments as well, or at least other staves. But for now, having oboe and piano is going to be good enough. And I'm just going to hit done here because that's all I need. And now I can see my chat again. All right, there we go. So, yeah, let's think about what I'm going to be doing. What I'm going to do here is I want to start with a melody. Dave, we're talking about accompaniment. We're talking about experimenting with accompaniment, which is, I know, something that you've done a bunch of. I'm going to be looking at a particular ways of doing this to solve particular problems that are going to come up often for people taking the Harmony and Chord Progressions course. The idea that we might want to try different chord progressions for the same melody, and we might want to try different ways of hearing that chord progression other than just relying on MuseScore's chord symbol playback. So these are the things we're going to be playing around with today. So the first thing I need is a melody, right? And so often I use like Mary Had a Little Lamb for this sort of example. And so it's always an easy call for me, and I'm going to enter that unless someone else suggests some other melody real quick that you think is going to work any better, or that would just be more fun to see. But it's got to be something equally simple. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to open the mixer, and I'm going to make sure that actually I don't really need to do that yet. I'm going to wait until I actually have some chords in. But I'm going to click the piano part and just enter a C chord and make sure I can hear my C chord, and I can. And in the mixer, I want to point out that you can see after you've entered chord symbols, you'll be able to see a channel in the mixer that says chords piano. In MuseScore 3, it's a little more complicated. You have to click a little arrow button to expand the channel, and then you'll see the chord symbol for that instrument. But every instrument that has chord symbols is going to have its own channel here for chord symbols, and then you can control the volume of those, and you can also mute them when you want. And so we're going to be taking advantage of that. All right, so what I'm going to do is real quickly type in Mary Had a Little Lamb, because man, I can type that melody so fast. But I'm not gonna. Am I gonna do it in C? Yeah, why not? I'm thinking about the range. You know, you've seen me enter melodies before, so I don't feel like I really need to belabor that, but I'm using the keyboard, right? 5 for quarter note, D, D, 6 half note, D, 5, E, G, 6, G, and then 5, E, D, C, D, E, 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 D, D, E, D, and then whole note C. All right, so there is Mary Had a Little Lamb. Now, one thing that I'm going to do right off the bat is, even though MuseScore was able to fit this all onto one system, I'm going to break it up into 2 lines. I'm just going to hit bar 4 and hit enter here to break it into 2 lines. And I'm going to hit enter again here, because I may use these additional measures for temporary stuff. We'll see. But yeah, just having 4 measures per line just gives me a little more breathing room as I experiment with things. So and I'm just used to seeing that in lead sheets. Lead sheets are so often presented 4 measures per line. And realistically, if that melody had been more complicated than just quarter notes, if there'd been 1/8 notes and so forth, it wouldn't have been able to fit all 8 measures on a line anyhow. Okay, so oh, Wisconsin. You know, there is actually a folk song, an old song, the Wisconsin Emigre. So it's about basically emigrating to Wisconsin from the East Coast, that my brother covers on one of his albums, and I have used that as an example before, but I don't have the melody like at the top of my head. It's a cool song. So anyhow, I've got my melody here, and I've got a piano staff. So the first thing I want to do is add some chord symbols. And I see mention of behind bars. And so yeah, Rod, I know, has that book and is very interested in orchestration and digging into things. And so he's got that. And what I will say is, yeah, it is a piece of work. This is Behind Bars, right? It's a big, heavy, thick book covering a ton of stuff. And I would absolutely agree with Dave that it's really overkill for many people. What I will also observe is there is now a reduced version of it. It's basically just the first sections up until where it starts talking about essentially orchestration. It's not really about orchestration, but the section that says idiomatic notation, this is all about how to notate really specific things for different instruments, for wind instruments versus keyboard instruments versus, you know, stringed instruments versus choral music. And it gets really into nitty gritty stuff about all the different instruments, and then into score layout. That's this part of the book. But the initial part of the book is just about things like how to beam your 8th notes correctly, which direction the stems go, where your articulations go, what side of the note they go on, and you know, basic stuff that applies to all instruments. And that's the first section of the book. So this first section of the book is now available as a separate book. It's called Behind Bars, General Conventions, which is a, you know, kind of unfortunate title for a book, but it is the title of the first section here, right? General Conventions. So they wanted it to match up with the name of the actual section in the big book. So it will be available, and it is available depending on what country you live in, because they're still working out their distribution channels. I'm not sure if it's on Amazon yet, but it will be soon. I think you can get it directly from the publisher if you're in the UK. You might be able to get it from other sources as well. But it was only just released a few weeks ago, and so they're still working out. Oh, the recording is covering me up. Okay, so here's the thing. This recording dot shouldn't be, and I guess if you're doing full screen view, it might be. Let me check that out. If I click my full screen thing, does it do that? I actually don't even know how to work. I'm not sure how to work this. I had actually put in some custom code to move that little recording dot, but it's apparently not doing the same thing. But if you're not full screen, it should already be working. So I would consider. Yeah, because I'm seeing it. It depends on how you've got your window showing. But I think if you've set it up, depending on the size of your browser window, it might do things. So maybe experiment with the size of your browser window, and you might get better results. All right. Anyhow, so let's go to my score here for Mary Had a Little Lamb. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to enter some really basic chords. When I say really basic chords, I mean triads and just 1, 4, and 5. And I pretty much know that on this song, I can get away with just 1 and 5. I'm not really going to need a 4 chord. So I'm going to use Control K, type in a chord symbol, C, and then control right to the next measure, control right to the next measure, G, control right to the next measure, C, control right to the next measure. I'll go ahead and repeat the C chord here, and I'm going to come back and talk about that in a second. Control right to the next measure, control right to the next measure, and then G, control right to the next measure, C. And when I say control, it's always command on Mac, of course. So I have these chords in here. What MuseScore will do by default is just play that chord kind of on the downbeat. It's going to play, it's just going to play a plain triad. And I'll tell you a little bit more about. Oh, Chris, that's good to know that you were able to buy that from Alfred, who I guess is a U.S. distributor for Faber, perhaps. But yeah, it's all still kind of being worked out. So let me just play this. It's going to play this chord on the downbeat, and I'm not going to worry about the fact that if the C chord lasts for 2 measures, it's not going to repeat it here, because I'm still going to hear the C chord in my head. But if I wanted, I could totally put another C chord on the second bar. I did repeat the C chord in bar 5 because I do think it was sort of important to me to hear that chord again on the downbeat. All right. So let me just play what I have. All right, so there we have it. So let me address a couple things also about behind bars. Yeah, so the full version of the book is quite pricey. I think in the US from Amazon, it was 80 something when I checked, but yeah, depending on what publisher you get from, it might be more. But general conventions, the stripped down version should definitely be cheaper than that. So if you're seeing the general conventions version for more than the full version of the book, someone is trying to rip you off. Don't buy from whoever that is. And that happens all the time online, right? People will recognize something is out of stock, and they will therefore offer it for sale themselves at a ridiculously jacked up price, and then they will just wait for it to get back in stock from a legitimate publisher, buy it, and then send it to you. It's a total ripoff when that happens. So be on the lookout for it. Yeah, do not pay $110 for the general conventions condensed version of Behind Bars. All right, so when I heard that playback, there were a couple things about it that I think already I want to improve upon. So one is the balance. That's too much chord. Would you agree? Too much chord for the melody. So I'm going to come in to the mixer. And because also I don't really need all the fanciness of Muse sounds and it can, take a little more system resources, I'm actually just going to switch to MS Basic for all of these sounds that I'm using. The oboe, the piano, and the chord symbols. I'm going to switch them all to MS Basic. All right. So let's hear this now. All right, so already the balance is more to my liking. It's, maybe not more realistic because in real life, an oboe playing in that register wouldn't be as much prominent as it is, but it's working for me. Okay, but so here's the thing: I've added these chords here, and now if I want to experiment with other chords, I'm a little hamstrung. Is that the word? My hands are tied a little bit because I kind of want to keep these chords to have as a reference, but then try out another set. So the mistake I made, and I knew I was making it, was attaching the chords to that same staff. What I really want is another staff or another instrument just for the chord symbols. So I've already added a piano instrument, but the piano instrument has 2 staves, and I don't need that just for the chord symbols. So I'm actually going to cheat and just add more oboes, but not give them any actual notes. All right. So you'll see there's method to this. It's going to work out pretty well. I've never done exactly what I'm going to be showing you today. It's more like I've thought about this and said, oh, this would be a pretty cool idea. I'm going to show it off. So I'm going to add myself some more oboes. I'm going to add as many oboes as I feel like I might want to try out. So I'm just adding a bunch of oboes, and I can always add more later. All right, now I've got all these oboes here. So what I can do now is copy. You know what? I really shouldn't have made them all oboes because now when I go to the mixer, it's a little hard to tell which one is which. Oh, no, they're not. They're numbered. Oboe 2, oboe 3, oboe 4. Perfect. Great. So what I'm going to do is move these chord symbols down to the oboe 2 staff. Actually, I can leave the basic ones where they are. Yeah, even better. Okay, check this out. I'm making this up as I go along, right? In here, you'll see there's a chords.oboe, and I can mute those chords. And by muting those chords, now when I play it, I only hear the melody. And if I want to try out some different chords, I can just enter them into this other staff here. So I can try C, and then F, space, E minor 7, A7, D minor 7, G7, C, G7. All right. So now listen what happens when I play this. So there you go. So I was able to add my chord symbols on the oboe 2 staff here and hear just those and not the original chords, right? So that's a kind of cool thing. And then if I want to try out yet another harmonization, I can come down here, select that rest, Control K, and go dum 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 dum. D sharp diminished. This one's not going to sound good, but I want you to hear that. Make that G7 into an F over G, please. Which one? I can totally do that, Michael. So which one do you want that way? The one at the end or the one in bar 3? So Peter, no, good observation. So no, all I had to do is press space. Press space moves to the next note or the next beat. Semicolon moves just to the next beat. So if my melody had been all eighth notes, if every time I press space, it's going to move to the next eighth note. But Semicolon will always move to the next beat. All right. So, all right. So, Michael, I will gladly try your version here. So you want F over G, which is basically a sus chord. How far is this advancing? I guess I'm not sure what you're asking here. Joanne, you might want to explain a little more, but I'm just trying out different chords for that original melody. And so far, I've only done the first 4 bars because that's all I really care about for the purpose of this demonstration. All right. So, so yes, James, the deal is when I press space, it's going to go to the next beat or note. So let me just go ahead and enter some 16th notes. I'm going to enter some 16th notes. Nope, so I entered 8th notes, but that's fine. If I type a C and press space, it does go to the next note. Space to the next note, space to the next note, space to the next note, right? It does go to the next note every time I press space. However, if there is no next note, notice that space will also move me through the rests, and it will let me move to beats that don't have a note. And that's because for lyrics, you don't put lyrics on rest, right? So lyrics are smart enough that space will skip all rests and won't stop on every beat. But for figured bass, space goes to the next note, or space works exactly the same way in figured bass as it does in chord symbols, also in Roman numeral analysis. It will move to the next note if there is a next note before the next beat, or it will stop on the next beat. Now, if I come back here, so space stopped on every single note. But if I press semicolon, it skips intervening notes and just moves to the next beat. So semicolon can be useful for that purpose. Also, control plus a number will advance by the duration that that number corresponds to. Like if you think about the usual duration shortcuts, 6 is for a half note. Control 6 will move 2 beats at a time. So it's moving from beat 1 to beat 3, beat 1, beat 3, beat 1, beat 3, etc. So, so yeah, those are different ways of advancing in here. But because I have no content in these measures, space and semicolon do the same thing. They stop on every beat. But if there had been 8th notes present, then space would have stopped on every 8th note. Semicolon would stop on every beat. So there you have it. All right. So I'm now going to go back to the mixer, and this time I'm going to mute the oboe 2 chords, but go ahead and let the oboe 3 chords play. So now there we go. So now we got that F over G, otherwise known as G9 sus that Michael was asking for. It's essentially from a functional perspective, they're both the 5 chord, right? I would consider them different voicings, different voicings of a 5 chord. One, they use different non-chord tones. So semicolon goes to the next beat. Yep. So semicolon moves to the next beat. So yeah, sorry, I was sort of breezing past that because I was thinking less about entering the chord symbols and more about these little tricks that I'm doing for their playback. But by all means, call me on that if I'm skipping over something that I need to explain better. So yeah, hopefully that is now clear. Space moves to the next note or beat. Semicolon moves to the next beat only. So in bar 4, A7 sharp 9. Whoa. Where would you want that, James, in bar 4 on beat 2 and then maybe a D minor 7 on beat 3? Is that where you're thinking? Because I could totally go there. I'll use my oboe 4 staff for that. Or maybe this time I'll just edit my chord symbols. I'll just type C and then type, no, I'll do it on my staff too. Instead of the diminished. Oh, bar 2. Sorry, that's bar 2. I'm doing these as quarter notes. So yeah, I mentioned, I either mentioned or I just grimaced while I entered the D sharp diminished, knowing full well it wasn't going to sound good. Let's hear that again, because James is absolutely right. It sounds terrible. Let's hear it again. So this chord, the E against the D sharp diminished, is not good. And it's not good. It's a clash because a general rule of thumb when it comes to diminished chords, and actually not just diminished chords, it actually applies to most chords. Notes a half step above chord tones clash with the chord. Notes a whole step above notes within the chord often sound good, but notes a half step above will usually clash. They're both non-chord tones, but they're kind of in a different category in terms of how dissonant they are. That minor second above a chord tone is far more dissonant than a major second above. What's weird is if I play that D sharp diminished chord, I'm going to play this on my keyboard here. If I play a D sharp diminished chord, that E, yes, is a half step above the D sharp. If I play an F, this in jazz terms is considered cool. This is considered not cool. This is considered cool, even though it's a half step below a chord tone. So there's sort of different categories of dissonance. Which notes sound good with a chord, which notes sound less good, which ones want to resolve one way or another. These are all things that we discuss in the Harmony and Chord Progressions course. In fact, that particular point about diminished chords is one that I make very strongly. So yeah, James is absolutely right. We don't want that. And so the thing is, as far as clashes go, you know, I use the term crunchy occasionally to describe degrees of clash. Dissonance is good. We want dissonance. Dissonance creates tension that we can then release. But certain dissonances are considered pleasant dissonances. It's like the pleasant tension of watching a scary movie. I'm not like into like slasher films, but I watch Star Trek, and a good number of Star Trek episodes have some sort of life or death tension drama to them. And we embrace that. We want that tension, and then have the satisfaction of the solution. So we like tension and release, but there's certain types of tension that, generally speaking, don't sound as good as other kinds of tension. And so one of the things that I want to point out is like what those things are. And that's not to say you can't choose to do something that you think other people won't think sounds good, but to sensitize us to what most people think sounds good. And by most people, I mean most people who have grown up listening to Western music that has used these same conventions. So the thing is, this chord progression is a lovely chord progression, and that's why I entered it. So this time, before I change that chord, let me actually just play the chord progression by itself. I'm just going to select the first measure of the oboe 3 part. Now it's going to solo that staff. And that's another new MuseScore 4 feature that's going to be real useful here. I'll be able to hear those chord symbols without the melody. So it's a lovely progression with that diminished chord. It's called a passing diminished chord when we go down from E minor to D sharp diminished to D minor. It's a really common progression. Sounds lovely with the right melody. Unfortunately, this is not a melody that works well with it. I'm going to change the melody now. I'm going to change the melody to one that's going to work well with it. Now having that melody be C, a chord tone against that D sharp diminished, sounds really nice, right? So anyhow, I will now undo those changes, go back to my original melody, and this time I'm going to change that chord to the A7. Now, James had suggested putting a sharp 9 on it, and I'm going to do that, but this is a jazzism, right? So I'm going to play it, and you all can tell me if you like this clash. So that was another crunchy chord. It's got some dissonance to it. A7 plus a C natural in it, basically, is the sharp 9. Technically a B sharp, right? So yes, and so Dave, this is a great observation here, that the voicings of these chords is going to affect things and your perception. And this is why at the beginning I said sometimes MuseScore is going to fool you into thinking something doesn't sound good because it chose a bad voicing, or it's not using good voice leading, I should say. The voicing itself might not be inherently bad, but the voice leading, how it connects to the previous chord, is MuseScore makes almost no attempt to connect a chord to the previous chord. There's only like a couple very specific situations where it does that. So yeah, James, I do think that flat 9 is going to be a little bit, so this is a fine sound in jazz. It's a fine jazz sound, but it's definitely pushing the crunch envelope. Flat 9, on the other hand, it's dissonant, and it has this note a half step above a chord tone, a half step above the root. So in principle, we would say, oh, this is one that's going to break that half step above chord tone rule. But this is the specific case where that is considered good. The flat 9 and the flat 13 are both really good alterations over dominant 7th chords because they come from the minor key. If we think about where this A7 is going, it's going to D minor. The key of D minor has a B flat in the key, right? B flat. The key of B flat has the key of D minor has a B flat in it. So putting the A7, putting that B flat on the A7, that's Bach. Bach loved that sound. It's a beautiful sound that's been around for hundreds of years. It's not like a really jazz specific sound. So now when I play this, I think we're going to hear it well. And yes, you're right, Marla, that these sounds, these clashes, these half steps mean you have to be really creative with your choice of harp pedaling to make sure that you can play these notes that are potentially a half step away and not be able to play the other notes. That particular one you could do, just put the B in the flat position, put the C in the sharp position, and then everything else would be fine choices there, the F natural. So basically that one works, but yeah, a lot of other sounds are going to be really awkward to achieve. So let's hear this now with the A7 flat 9. But there's one more thing I'm going to do. I'm going to play it first, and then I'm going to make one other change. All right, even before I get any further, you notice what's happening here. The piano is late coming in. And that's because MuseSounds takes a little moment to kick start. It's a little unfortunate, but it's the way it is. And you can sometimes address that by being more clever about where you select. Like this time I'm going to select the clef. Oh, also, the second time you play something, it's going to generally be faster. But I'm getting tired of dealing with that. So I'm just going to switch everything over to MS Basic right now. I'm going to go to View and then Playback Setup and switch to MS Basic. I'm not going to set it as the default for new scores, but I am going to activate this profile for this score. So remember, I had already changed the original oboe and the original chord symbol playback to MS Basic, but then I added all those oboes. Well, those and they came with their own chord symbol channels. So now they are all set to MS Basic as well. So let's hear this again now. All right, so I like that. So let's do it again and really listen to that A7. The voicing of that A7 was perhaps not the best voicing. So let's talk about the voicings of these chords. I'm going to select this chord here. Oh, by the way, before I do that, I should also mention, I could have put the melody on every staff. And why didn't I? I don't know, because I wasn't thinking. Let's do that. Let's get the melody copied onto all the other staves. And so then I don't have to worry about which ones are muted and which ones aren't. I can just select the one that I want. How about that? So let's copy the melody without overwriting the chord symbols, shall we? Let's learn how to do that. I'm going to select the first measure here, Shift Control N to select all the way to the end. So now I've selected that entire first staff. But I want to exclude. I'm going to close the mixer with F10. I want to exclude the chord symbols from the selection. I'm going to do that by going to View, Selection Filter, and I'm going to uncheck chord symbols. Now, when I press Control-C and come down to the bottom staff and hit Control-V, it copies the melody but leaves the chord symbols intact. And I can do the same here, do the same here. So, and now I can recheck chord symbols in my selection filter and close the selection filter because I'm done with it. So now, if I want to, now I can go back to the mixer and stop having to play with all those mute settings. All I have to do now to solo one of these is select it. Oh, James, good question. Did I write A flat 9 or A7 flat 9? I wrote A7 flat 9, and I wrote A7 flat 9, and I'm pretty sure the 7th was in there. But I will say, if you write A flat 9, you're going to get A flat 9. And that's the way a human would do it too. If you write A and then put flat 9 in parentheses, you will get a triad only. But so let's check this out, because I did want to talk about the voicing of this. So I'm going to move over to the piano staff and enter my A7 here. I'm going to move to beat 3, type A7 flat 9. Oh, before I do that, though, I just want to point out that I can now solo any of these. If I want to hear my second version again, I can just click measure. I can select the first measure, or select the whole measure of the first measure of the oboe 2 part. And now I'm hearing just that one. And if I want to hear the oboe 3 version, so there's the A7 flat 9. So I'm going to submit that the G is in there, but you're not hearing it probably because it is not voiced very well. What I've done now is I've entered the A7 in the piano staff here. I'm going to right click it, and I'm actually going to save this because I'm a little afraid of what I'm about to do right now. So I want to make sure that I have this thing saved, because that's always a good thing to do, right? And I usually get lazy and forget to save things, and then I get on other people's cases about not saving things, and I'm just as guilty, right? So let me move to an appropriate folder here, and I'm going to call this accompaniment. So what we're going to be doing right now is kind of morphing from talking about MuseScore's chord symbol playback to doing our own thing. All right, so now that I've saved this, I'm going to right-click that A7 flat 9 and choose Realize Chord Symbols from the pop-up menu. You can also select that chord symbol, and you can select multiple chord symbols in doing this. You can go to the Tools menu and say Realize Chord Symbols here. When I do that, pops up a dialog, and it asks if I want to override with custom options. I'm going to say no. I'm just going to say OK. And now it's going to show me the actual voicing. It's going to actually place those notes on the staff. And as I suspected, it actually kind of screwed this up a little bit. Notice there's still a whole rest here, and then there's notes on beat 3. So now this score is basically corrupt. I was afraid of that. That's why I wanted to save it first. I'm going to undo that, and this time I am going to enter rest. So Peter was saying, don't you have to pre-enter rests? No, you don't, but I kind of knew that bug existed when it comes to realize chord symbols, that if they're not already a rest or something on that beat, bad things sometimes happen. They don't always happen, but they sometimes do. All right, so better results now. So now the notes are placed when I now right-clicked and said Realize Chord Symbols. It shows me the actual notes. There's a low A, and then here's the notes of the voicing: C sharp, E, G, A, B flat. That's what it is playing. This plus the low A. This is not a good voicing. We don't typically cluster all those notes together. We wouldn't bother playing the A in our voicing. I mean, you might, but typically we would omit it, knowing it's going to be in the bass. Typically in these complex voicings, we do not, I won't say we never double the root, but no, if you've got all these other notes, I mean, that's five notes. So if I'm trying to play this in my right hand of my piano, I need all 5 fingers to do that. And voice leading wise, what is that going to lead me to on the next chord? I don't do that. You play 3 or 4 notes of the chord. If I was going to play 4, it would be the C sharp, E, G, and B flat. If I was going to play only 3, I would sacrifice the E. I would sacrifice the E for 2 reasons. One is because it's the 5th of the chord, and that's the most expendable in general. But E is also the melody note, so why double that? So what I might choose to do here, if I didn't like that A7 voicing, is I might go ahead and use that Realize Chord Symbols on another staff to generate the voicing, but then get rid of the notes that I don't want. I'm just going to, because I had nothing in the subsequent measure, MuseScore tied it over, and I didn't really want that. So Let me just select the rest of that score there and delete. So now I've got just the 4-note version. And if I play this now, we're going to hear both. We're going to hear all of it. So now we're hearing the A7 flat 9 from the oboe staff. We're hearing the A7 flat 9 from the piano staff. And we're hearing the written out voicing. Now I can go into the mixer and say, well, you know what? On that piano staff, I don't want to hear the chord symbols. So on the piano staff, where's chords.piano? I am going to mute chords.piano. And I'm also going to turn off the playback of that A7 flat 9 on the oboe staff. So I'm going to select that chord and then go to properties and uncheck play. So now when I play this thing, even though there's the A7 flat 9 on the oboe staff, the A7 flat 9 on the piano staff, and the written out voicing, I'm only going to hear that written out voicing when I play this. Okay, now if I select this measure, I didn't hear the piano part. Why? Because I'm using that trick of soloing by selecting a measure, and that's not working for me here. So I am going to need to go to the mixer and go ahead and say, I want to solo the piano, the chords, I want to solo the piano part, not the chords piano, but the piano part. So I'm letting the piano part solo. I don't know, to be honest. I don't know if this is going to work. I don't know if that soloing happens in addition to when I've selected a staff, so I'm about to find out. All right, so no, if I select a staff, it solos only that staff. It ignores the fact that I chose to solo the piano part. Although actually, yeah, it just turned that off. Let me try that again though, because I feel like maybe I didn't click it fully. One more time. Yeah, it just basically turned off the soloing of the piano part. So instead of relying on that trick of selecting a measure, I'm going to actively solo the piano part and solo the oboe 2 part. Now, I won't select the full measure. I'll just select, the time signature here. So that time it did play the A7, but didn't play the chord symbols because I haven't soloed those. So I need to say that I want to solo chords oboe 2. So you can see you got to play around a little bit here to get this to do what you want. But there you go. You can play with these techniques to get them to work. This mixing and matching of, I want some chord symbols to come from the oboe staff and some from the piano staff. Yeah, I probably bit off more than I could chew there. I got it to work, but probably I wouldn't do that. Probably what I would do is once I got to that point, say, you know what, I'm just going to copy that entire chord progressions down here and then realize the whole chord progression and then delete what I don't want. So now I'm going to do that. And Peter, I see your question. It's a real good one. So we're going to try that. So I'm going to select all of these chord symbols here. I'm going to select, I'm going to right click that C on the oboe 2 staff and then say select similar on this staff. And that selects just the chord symbols on the oboe 2 staff. Oops, that's oboe 3, but that's fine, whatever. And now copy, and now come down to the piano and paste. And let me go back to the mixer and make sure I turn off all those little soloings that I did because they're going to get in my way now. So instead, since I'm focusing on oboe 3 here, I think I'm just going to mute oboe 1 and oboe 2. And let's see what happens first of all now, because I'm not sure if it's going to play the chord symbols from oboe 1 or oboe 2. Yeah, it did. So I guess I'll just keep soloing things. I'm going to solo oboe 3 and solo piano. The chords aren't realized yet, so I'm not going to hear the piano yet. But now I want to realize all these chords. So again, I'm going to right-click one, select similar on this staff, and go to Tools, realize chord symbols. This time, I am going to check with this override custom option. So Peter mentioned the inspector, and also with the properties panel in MuseScore 4 would let me control voicings for these things. But I can also do that while I'm realizing the chord symbols here. So in this dialog, I'm going to choose the override with custom options. And you'll see there's a couple things. There's an interpretation, literal versus jazz. The jazz interpretation is basically going to add ninths to chords. It's going to add unaltered ninths to most chords. It's going to add a flat ninth if it detects that A7 situation. If it detects it's a dominant seventh chord resolving down a fifth to a minor chord. Actually, it might even do it if it's not minor. I forget. It uses some sort of heuristic to decide when it should be minor. Notice there's also voicing. There's auto, but there's this other ones, close, drop two, 6 note, 4 note, 3 note. These are all different ways of telling it how to voice the chord. Well, I'm going to try to tell it the 4 note voicing. And I'm going to say up until note chord symbol. By choosing the 4 note voicing, we're not going to get that cluster of 5 notes from the A7 flat 9. We're not going to get that huge cluster. It's going to choose a note to omit. And hopefully it's going to choose wisely. So now I'm going to hit OK. All right. So in doing this, notice it also spread the notes out more. Let's listen to this. Well, that's entirely different, right? I mean, that's a totally different sound for those voicings. It spread them out more. And so I guess I wasn't remembering that the 3 note voicing option was going to do that. It added ninths and it spread the notes out. That might be what you want, but it might not be. So I'm going to undo that and I'm going to try again. I'm going to go to Tools, Realize Chord Symbols. And this time I am going to override, but I'm going to leave it on literal interpretation, not the jazz interpretation, because those extra ninths were too different. I'm going to leave voicing at auto. No, I am going to change the voicing to 4 note and see what it does. Yeah, it still spreads them out. Well, that's actually much better in a lot of ways to my ears. That spread out version of these chords, it basically chose to do what's called a drop 2 voicing of them. I didn't remember that if you choose the 4 note option that's what it would do, but apparently that is what it does. And so now the notes are spread out more. They're not all clustered in that 4th octave. That's what MuseScore does by default, by the way, is it will place the bass note down in octave 2. So, not the octave immediately below middle C, but the octave below that. It'll place the bass note down there, and it will place all the rest of the notes in octave 4. It'll place them between middle C and B up here. And that's how you can get yourself into voicing issues. So where's my, oh, come on, I've got my paper keyboard somewhere. I use that all the time. How did I? It's around. Nuts. All right. Well, oh, yeah, I will use this one. So, it's more easier than bringing up my whole fancy thing. The C chord that it's going to play is going to be here. It's going to be C, E, G. But the G chord, if it wanted to play a G triad, it's going to be D, G, B, bottom to top. And then if you go back to a C chord, so we're going to hear this. D, G, B, and then you play a C chord. It's going to play C, E, G, but that's not good. We'd rather hear D, G, B, resolving to E, G, C, right? We would rather hear that leading tone resolve. Again, one of the things that we talk about in the harmony course, resolution of leading tones, important principle in voice leading. So, so sometimes the voice leading that MuseScore creates is going to be not good. Here's an example of it right here. Check out I'm going to solo the piano staff. It really should have gone more like this. It should have gone more like, right? That B should have resolved up to a C, but it just didn't. And it was a little unsatisfying as a result. Little I wanted that. I didn't get it, right? So this is one of those things where just relying on MuseScore's playback will sometimes disappoint you. So what I could do is say, you know what, I'm just going to take that voicing and I'm going to take that C, move it up an octave. I can move the G down an octave, and I'm using control up and control down, selecting that E and moving it up. I'm looking at the voice leading. I'm saying, I want that B to go to C. I want that D to go to E. And I want that, oh, that's a seventh. That's right. Seventh. And the seventh is resolving up to G instead of down to E. That's fine, because at least it lets this triad be complete. These are, again, voice leading things we'll learn much more about in the course. But let's hear this now. So much more satisfying to hear that leading tone resolve. So, Dave, and Rachel, I see your question too. And yeah, it would be kind of nice if MuseScore would have a way to spread that realized chord to two staves. It doesn't, but there is an option here. Does it work still? I think, no, there used to be an option that MuseScore would attempt to split stuff up into staves. It never worked very well, and I think it doesn't exist at all anymore. So yeah, unfortunately, that's just not a thing. So this is like one of these things where, no, you're not going to use this to actually generate real accompaniment, but to just play with the ideas, it works pretty well. So now coming back to Rachel's question, which I think is a variation on the same thing. Is there a way to get chord voicing spread over the two? Oh, it's the same question. Yeah, but basically Rachel's and Dave asking the same thing. So no, there is not. So what I could do is delete all, I'm going to undo all those things that I just did. And now I'm going to realize again, and this time, instead of choosing the those special options, I'm just going to use the defaults. Tools, realize chord symbols, where'd it go? Realize chord symbols. Oh, there it is, way up here. Just use the defaults, and this time I'm just going to remove that A from the A7, because that was really the only thing that was bugging me. And I am going to take that C up an octave. Actually, I'll just add another C to it. No, I'll just raise it up an octave. So now when I hear this, this will also sound pretty good, I think. So yeah, that's all good. And if I wanted, I could raise that C also in the F over G, so that I get to keep that common tone between those. So now, Dave, you are definitely leading towards the last thing that I wanted to do here, which is to talk about building your own accompaniment. Because at some level, just relying on this manipulating of the chord symbol playback is, okay, there's a couple things going on here. One is it's going to require certain knowledge already about how this voice leading business works, and it also doesn't give you the right sort of practice. It makes you spend your time fiddling with details you don't want to fiddle with and miss some important details that are maybe better to deal with. So here's what I'm going to do. And James, yeah, it would be kind of nice if figured bass could be realized, but the rules for that would be infinitely more complex to do a good job of it. And so the guy who would have been able to do it basically said no, it's not happening, because he didn't want to do a half-assed job of it, and no one else is really even capable of trying. That's a slight exaggeration, but anyhow, yeah, that's not going to be the case. What I'm going to do is add myself another piano here. So I'm going to add another piano. And yeah, I could make it an actual bass part, but I'm just going to do this with piano. I'm adding another piano, and what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to go back to the mixer, and I'm going to mute now, instead of solo, that first piano, and I'm going to solo my second piano. So I've got the oboe 3 and the second piano soloed. So all I'm going to hear now is the melody and the second piano. Let's see. Yeah, that's all I'm getting. Yes, okay, good. Now I'm going to enter notes into that second piano part. Now, by the way, notice when I did this, it couldn't quite fit two systems onto a page anymore, and now everything's all kind of spread out awkwardly. Here's going to be my quick fix here. I'm actually going to just hide the staves I didn't need. And you know what? Oh, man, I told you I'm making this stuff up as I go along. I'm going to turn off all that soloing business and muting business. Here's why. I'm going to use the instrument panel and hide the instruments I don't want. I don't want that. I don't want that oboe 1. I don't want that oboe 2. I don't want that oboe 4, and I don't want that piano 1. I just want the oboe and piano 2. And when you do that, MuseScore automatically mutes them. This is sometimes what you want, sometimes not what you want, and so they're working on ways of making, of doing providing other options. But in this case, it's going to do exactly what I want. I'm going to hear just the melody. I hear just the oboe and the piano 2 staff. So I still want to go back to the piano, to the mixer, and mute the chords for the oboe staff that I have, the oboe 3 staff. I want to mute the chords there. But now I can enter my notes directly onto the piano 2 staff. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to enter bass notes, all right? C. I'm going to go 6, C, D, E, A, control down, D, G down, C, G. All right. So, yeah, the hidden staves still have mixer strips so that, because that is a good point. There's no reason that they should be displayed since you can't do anything with them, but that's all kind of being redesigned to make it possible to independently mute them. By the way, just so you know, if you wanted to hide say the oboe 4 staff, but not make it muted, here's what you do. You'd open it up. You'd click the little arrow next to open 4 and next to oboe 4. And instead of clicking the I to close, to mute, to hide the oboe 4 instrument, you'd click the button to hide just the staff for the oboe 4. So oboe 4 as an instrument is still visible, but its staff is hidden. That is the way currently you can get an instrument to be hidden but still heard but not seen. So that's actually a new feature of MuseScore 4. There was no way to hide staves individually in MuseScore 3. You could just hide the instrument and then all the staves would go away. So you couldn't hide just one staff of a piano. So that's kind of a nice new thing. But anyhow, so now I have, let me just go back and hide the oboe 4 because I don't really need it. Let's listen to this now, because this is kind of what I talked about in my newsletter article. The video that went with that, just listening to the melody and bass. Let's hear this. Now, see, this is nowhere near as full as what we were hearing before, but this is something that I think most of us, even if you're not pianists, could probably manage to plunk out, right? And it's something already. Right? That's totally playable for people who aren't accomplished pianists. You could do that if you have a keyboard. And I totally recommend doing that sort of thing. As we work through the different things we're going to talk about in the course, working through these on the piano so you can just quickly make your own little changes and not have to be typing things into a computer program to sound this stuff out. It's hugely valuable. But in the video, I also mentioned, well, 2 notes is fine, but there's a 3rd note we're going to want if the chord is not diatonic. So I'm going to come over to that A7 chord and just put in a C sharp. And I'll put it down in this octave. So now let's just hear this. So I would say that's still pretty disappointing, right? I'm going to give you another principle here. First of all, when chords are not diatonic, they're not going to be diatonic for, usually it's going to be the 3rd. That's the most common note that's going to make it not be diatonic. The 3rd is going to be raised because it's a secondary dominant. Again, one of the things you're going to learn much more about in the course. Well, thirds are good notes in general. So I'm just going to go ahead and add thirds across the board. 6, E, I'll put it down below the melody. And then F is the third of the F chord. G is the third of the E chord. And then C sharp is the third of that chord. F is the third of that chord. B is the third of that chord. E is the third of that chord, and then B would be the third of the F over G, but I'm going to enter it as a C because that's kind of the idea of the sus chord, again, something you'll learn about. So now I've got thirds everywhere. Let's hear this. Well, this is better in some ways, but the voice leading isn't so good because every time the chords go around the circle of fifths, E to A to D to G to C, those thirds jump a lot. Well, so what I want to do now is maybe add either roots or sevenths to these chords so that they're not jumping so much. So I'm going to add a seventh below that G, which was D. I'll add a seventh above that C sharp, which is G. Add a seventh below the D minor, which is C. Add a seventh above that B, which is F, and then add a root below that. So now let's hear this guy. And that's now a lot better. I think I want to add my seventh on that last chord and just hear it one more time. So, when you're experimenting with chord symbols, yes, by all means, use MuseScore's chord symbol playback when you can. Use that trick of using multiple staves so that you can, just hear one version or another. But by all means, practice this other thing of just playing these simply voicings that are just roots, thirds, and either sevenths or more roots, because it is going to give you nice chromatic motion very often. Sevenths resolving to thirds is going to give you stepwise motion, either chromatic or whole step, anytime the chords move on the circle of fifths. So it's going to do good things for you voice leading. So earlier when I said if you let MuseScore realize the chord symbols for you and then you start messing with things, you're focusing on details that aren't really the right details to focus on for learning purposes. This, what I just did, third, seventh, voice leading, connecting them, that's the kind of stuff you want to focus on. So by building your own voicings that way, you get practice with the things you want to get practice on, and you learn more about voice leading in the process, and you get results that actually sound pretty good already. So that's my spiel, all right? Lots more that one could do, and then, play around with different rhythms and so forth. That's a topic for another day, but we just want to hear the chords, and I think this is a good way. Everything that I've showed you today are good tools to have in your pocket or tool chest, whatever, to help you as you're experimenting with different chord progressions. All right, so that said, let's wrap things up here. And thanks everyone for being here. Thanks for all the interesting questions and nice comments about things and the exchanges going on. Love to see that kind of interaction. And so, yeah, the Harmony and Chord Progressions course is where we're going to delve into all these topics of how I'm choosing these chords, how I'm deciding, did that clash with the melody? What could I do about it? What could I change to make this sound better to me? How do I want to voice these things? These are all the issues that we will be discussing in the Harmony course. So I strongly recommend y'all enroll if you at all possibly can pull it off. It's going to be an amazing run for the next couple months while we do this, and hope to see as many of you there as we can. And tomorrow I'll just be talking much more about the Harmony course and about harmony in general. So hope to see you there as well for the music masterclass. See you all later.